I walked out to my property one morning and froze. Half my trees were gone. Not trimmed, not damaged, completely cut down. And behind them, where there used to be a natural barrier, I could now see straight to the lake. My lake. That's when I noticed something even worse. A pipe running from the shoreline, straight toward the HOA neighborhood. That's the moment I realized this wasn't an accident. Someone had cut my trees to get direct access to the water, and they thought they could just take it. What they didn't know was, I had the paperwork to prove I owned that entire lake. And what happened next didn't just stop them. It cost them everything. Before we get into the story, if you enjoy crazy HOA drama and real-life situations like this, take a second to like the video and subscribe to Karen's Stories Daily. It really helps the channel grow. And if you've ever dealt with entitled neighbors who think they can take what isn't theirs, you're going to want to hear how this ends. So this all started a couple of years after I inherited a large piece of land from my family. It wasn't just a normal property. It was a mix of forest, open land, and a private lake that had been part of our family for generations. Growing up, I used to spend summers there, fishing, hiking, just enjoying the quiet. It was one of those places that felt untouched. After I inherited it, I didn't change much. I kept things the way they had always been. Maintained the trails, checked on the trees, made sure the lake stayed clean. It wasn't about profit. It was about preserving something that mattered. Now, about a mile away from the edge of my land, a new development started going up. At first, I didn't think much of it, just another group of houses being built. But over time, that development grew. And eventually, it backed right up against the edge of my property. And with that development came an HOA. At first, there was no direct interaction. My land was clearly marked, fenced in certain areas, and legally separate from anything they controlled. But then small things started happening. I'd find footprints near the edge of the property, where the trees were thinner, trash left behind, sometimes even signs that people had walked closer to the lake. It was annoying, but not unusual. People get curious. So I put up a few more signs. Private property. No trespassing. I thought that would be enough. It wasn't. A few weeks later, I found one of my signs knocked over. Then another one disappeared completely. That's when I started checking the property more often. And then came the morning everything changed. When I saw those trees cut down, these weren't small trees either. Some of them had been there for decades. They formed a natural barrier between my land and the outside world. And now they were gone. Cut clean, deliberately. I walked closer, and that's when I saw the pipe, a long plastic pipe running from the edge of the lake, heading toward the direction of the HOA development. At first I couldn't believe it. Then I followed it. It led straight toward the back of the neighborhood. That's when it hit me. They weren't just trespassing, they were taking water from my lake. I took photos of everything. The cut trees, the pipe, the path they had cleared. Then I drove straight to the edge of the HOA neighborhood. That's where I saw it. Workers digging, extending the line. I walked up and asked what they were doing. One of them said they were installing a temporary water access line for the neighborhood. I asked who authorized it. He said, the HOA. That's when I knew exactly where this was going. I asked to speak with whoever was in charge. And that's when Karen showed up. Same type you'd expect. Confident, clipboard, acting like everything she was doing was completely normal. She looked at me and said, "Can I help you?" I pointed toward the pipe that runs from my lake. She didn't even hesitate. That lake is considered a shared resource. I actually laughed for a second because I thought she had to be joking. I said, "No, it's not. I own that land. And the lake." She shook her head. "The HOA has rights to access water for community use." I asked her to show me those rights. She said, "It's part of our development plan." That's when I realized something important. She wasn't guessing. She actually believed what she was saying. And that made it worse. I told her directly, "You need to stop everything immediately. That's private property." She crossed her arms. "We've already started installation." Then she turned and walked away like the conversation was over. At that point, I didn't argue anymore. I went home, and I pulled out every document I had related to that property. Land surveys, deeds, historical records, and there it was, clear as day. The lake was entirely within my property lines. Not shared. Not public. Not accessible. Mine. The next morning, I contacted a property lawyer. I showed him everything. His reaction was immediate. They can't do this. Not just because of the trespassing, but because they had cut down trees, altered land, and attempted to extract water without permission. That's multiple legal issues. We started documenting everything, photos, videos, timeline of events. Then we sent a formal notice to the HOA demanding they stop immediately and remove all installations. At first, there was no response. So we escalated. A few days later, I went back to the property. The pipe was still there. But now there was more activity. They were actually using it. That's when I called local authorities to report unauthorized land use and property damage. Things moved quickly after that. Officials came out to inspect the situation. They reviewed the land records, walked the property lines, checked the installation, and within a short time, it became very clear. The HOA had no rights to that land. None. The pipe was removed. Work stopped immediately, but that wasn't the end of it, because now there were consequences. Cutting down trees alone can lead to serious penalties. Add an unauthorized land alteration and water extraction. It becomes a much bigger issue. Legal action followed. And this time, the HOA couldn't just ignore it. They had to respond. And when everything came out, the documents, the proof, the clear ownership, the situation completely flipped. Neighbors started asking questions. Board members got nervous. Because this wasn't just a small mistake anymore. This was something that affected the entire community. In the end, the HOA had to cover damages. Pay for restoration and issue formal acknowledgments that the land and lake were privately owned. Karen, she wasn't as confident anymore. Actually, she stopped showing up entirely after a while. And the story spread fast. Because nothing travels quicker than a situation where someone tries to take something they don't own and gets caught. To this day, the property is quiet again. The lake is protected. And no one tries to cross that line anymore. If you've ever dealt with something like this or had neighbors push-bound areas like that, let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, share it with someone who loves real-life drama. And make sure to subscribe to Karen's Stories Daily for more stories where people learn the hard way. That just because you think you have control doesn't mean you actually do.